now that you have touched on the lines of language, with every child can actually learn English. Uh, is that the reason why the NEP has brought in this statement saying whenever possible, students till class 5 to be taught in regional local languages? But
Yeah.
wouldn't that make that particular child a little incompetent when compared to the other children who are learning English since like their young age, primary education?
Right. Well, you know, I think the national education policy has a good point that a child should learn from class 1 in his or her mother tongue. Uh, but the, the beauty is that a child is naturally bilingual. And in a country like India, where you can't get a decent job without English, I mean, this is the truth. And not only in India, but if you aspire to any kind of high-end job in the world, you have to know the global language. English is not the language of England and America. English is a global language. So every French mother, every German mother, every Chinese mother, Japanese mother, they want their child to learn English. So the answer, my answer is that now with technology available, it's so easy to learn of another language that you should say from class 1, the child can learn literature, history, reading, all these things in the mother tongue. But immediately in class 1, the child should learn, say, science, arithmetic, in other words, divide up the subjects. You learn half the subjects in English, half the subjects. So there's no question of an English medium school or a Hindi medium school. You break that barrier. Today, people who go to Hindi medium schools, they feel inferior. And the people in go to English medium children, they feel superior. That's terrible.
Yes.
You're creating a class system because of your education policy. Break up this idea. Every school is a bilingual school. So if you're in Tamil Nadu, you learn Tamil, you learn stories, schools, history in Tamil, and you learn maths in English. Similarly in Bengali, you can do your Rabindra Sangeet in Bengali, and you at the same time learn some subjects in English. And this is because it is really true that a child is bilingual. We don't give the child enough credit. And it is also wrong to say that, the other argument is you don't have teachers in English. Well, now with these apps, everybody should go and try out these apps. Every teacher can become bilingual.
Yes.
Because how well. So a teacher becomes more like a facilitator. Even a teacher doesn't have to have a perfect English. As long as that app is there and you spend half an hour a day, 15 minutes a day, the parent should give you that smartphone to use, or your school should have a smartphone so that you can learn English. So that would be my answer to this issue of education, language in education. We have to remember that English is now an Indian language.
Yes, sir.
Just as cricket is now an Indian sport. Cricket is an Indian sport that happened to be invented in England. English is an Indian language that happened to be invented in England. But whoever speaks it owns it. You and I are speaking English. We are owners of English.
Yes.
The English are no better than us. In fact, Indians have a better accent than a lot of English people or American people. And so we have good schools. Americans and English will come to learn English here.
So on the lines of every school should have a smartphone probably to learn the language English. But today we see the situation is such that there is an urban-rural divide even due to COVID, even today in 2020. So in the lines of the same, I want to ask you that does poverty, education, and economic growth have an impact on the other?
Yes, I think education is related to development. And it's in fact one of the pillars and one of the failures of the Indian state. And this is not now, but right from the beginning. We have not provided a quality education to our children. And this partly accounts for our poverty. The critical job of development and the economic policy should be jobs. And we measure GDP, but we should have as good a measure. We do have a measure now, but it's not as effective and certainly not as true as it should be. But nevertheless, mota, we know that Mr. Modi, when he got elected in 2014, he promised jobs. And he used the word Vikas. He didn't talk about Hindutva. He talked about Vikas.
Growth.
Vikas was a code word for jobs. And the jobs that people were being promised, or they thought that would come with Achhe Din, Mr. Modi promised Achhe Din. Those were good jobs. They were not pakoda wala jobs.
Yes.
Now, to get a good job, you need education. And in fact, today, one of our failures is that there are too many people in agriculture. Agriculture accounts for only 13-14% of GDP, but there are almost 45-50% of the people in education, in agriculture. Now, the reason is that we just have not created enough jobs. And so one of the things that happened is that, after 1991, actually the economic history of India begins after 1991. Before 1991 was license, permit, inspector, Raj. There was no economic freedom. We did not win our freedom in 1947. We got our freedom only after 1991. Because unless you have economic freedom, you can't have real political freedom. So it was all well to have, talk about elections and all that, but we were not creating jobs. Poverty rate was just as bad in 1980 as it was in 1950. So it was a real failure, a real disaster. The first 40 years, we may have, we should be proud that we became a democracy, the largest democracy. But we failed our people when it came to poverty. The answer was not communism or socialism or a mixed economy or a license, permit, inspector Raj. So coming back now, the reality is that in 1991, we opened industry, but we did not open education. Education still remained
Closed,
like we were still in a prison. the kind of prison we were in for the first 40 years of our country. And so if we had now is that opportunity that, I think the NEP has not addressed the real issue as we have talked about. And if we can address the real issue, more and more Indians will get a quality education. And with quality education, you will be able to give. I'll give you one statistic. 98% of the people who go for a job at a call center or a call center job are rejected. Why? Because they don't know English.
Language.
Imagine going to a job from one call center to another call center and getting rejected. So, therefore, good education will lead, because frankly, even in the world economy, the export economy needs higher quality of education. And services which are an export oriented, that is IT, call centers, software, these are all export businesses where you have to communicate with an international customer. So all this requires better education. And so there's a direct link between education and economic growth.
Yes, sir. So you spoke about how funding a child is going to be more useful than funding a school. So we spoke from the teacher's point of view, but I wanted to know if funding a child is going to curtail the dropout rates that might exist in the economy, in the country.
Well, the dropout rates exist for a number of reasons. One, that if the teacher doesn't show up in class, what is the incentive for the child to be there? And so it's related to the disease of governance. If you had an inspiring teacher, a teacher who tells stories, who teaches you and you have fun, every child would go to school because of that. So that's the way to teach. To make education a joy. Learning should be joyful. And so I would say that's one of the important reasons why children drop out of schools.
Yes, sir. So I completely agree with that. And so I wanted to ask you, with this technology flourishing and the changing dynamics and the NEP being drafted, what is the future of India? Probably when UN turns 100 after 20-25 years. So where do we see our country in terms of education?
Well, certainly, I think that forget this COVID business. It'll go away, and the economy will come back. Our demographics are still good, and while the economy had slowed down in the last few years before COVID, but for ever since the reforms, the average growth rate of the Indian economy has been 7%. And that makes it one of the highest in the world. And so I think we've lost some momentum, but we will regain it. And so prosperity will spread in the country. However, unless we reform our education. Now, the NEP has done a good job of the syllabus reform, and hopefully education will become a more joyful. Teacher training has been emphasized in the NEP, but what you need most of all, the reform, is governance. You need governance reform. You know, teachers today are hired by bribing politicians to get a job. And once you bribe the politician, you get a job, then you feel you don't have to teach. Pakka ho gaya, lifetime job, lifetime employment. And teachers are very powerful politically. They're powerful because they man the elections. In other words, the school teacher is the one who controls the booth at polling time. And so politicians are afraid of teachers. And so that's why it's not going to be easy. And I wish I could be more hopeful. I mean, unless all political parties come together and say we are not going to accept this, we will not. So the reform of governance is really the central reform. The reform, it means not just the reform of education will come about, but also we need to reform the judiciary, the police, the civil service. All these areas are, I mean, 1 out of 3 politicians today has a criminal record. If you see a study of the members of parliament and the members of the Vidhan Sabha, 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4 has a criminal record. Now, that's an area that also needs reform. Anyway, I think we've covered the field, and I'm an optimist, and I believe that in the next 25 years, Jahnavi, that somebody will come around who will have the guts. The hopeful sign today is the NEP, but NEP will have to be grounded in strong reform at the state level, because education is a state subject.
Yes, sir. So I completely agree with that. And so now talking about the UN SDGs, say 2030, do you think education is the medium to achieve the other global goals?
Well, I mean, if we can improve education, I think that it's the foundation. You know, especially studies have shown that if a girl child is educated, then she grows up and she makes sure that her own children get educated, and sort of the virtuous circle takes place in a family. So I do believe that education has spread effects in all spheres of activity. It empowers a person. You walk into an interview and you feel confident if you're educated, if you're articulate, etc. And also you can solve problems. You know, today India is one of the countries where our startups culture is something this government has encouraged a great deal. And there is a real startup thing. So that is confidence, you know. So I personally feel that education will impact all the other goals of the SDG goals of the UN. And by no means I want to leave us feeling disappointed. The problems are there. It's better to recognize them than to sort of push them under the carpet.
Yes, awareness is the priority, is primary. So yes, I completely agree. And before we wrap up, I would like to ask you that what would you like to convey to the young minds, to the millennials today, in terms of the quality education, sustainable development goal?
Well, I began in a way which suggested that we have to take the responsibility for our own lives. We can't just say that, oh, my teacher wasn't very good or my parents didn't do this. All of us have a sense of responsibility. We have responsibility to our own happiness. And I've explained how education plays a role in giving us the opportunity to make a life. And similarly, I think as responsible persons, as responsible citizens, we have a duty to society. We are nourished by society, and we 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 should give back to society too. And so I would say certainly not just, if you don't need to have just money, you know, uh, for every person in a democracy, I believe. We spend our time talking about Narendra Modi, Rahul Gandhi, Mr. Trump. Whereas if we spent 1 to 2 hours a week in our neighborhood, neighborhood, checking to see whether the garbage is being collected, the lights, the bulbs are there on the lights, the streets are paved, there are no puddles on the street. That is also civic virtue. And that is a duty in every democracy for every citizen. Instead of sitting around, complaining, Modi ne ye kiya, nahi kiya, wo kiya, we should take charge of our lives. And one of the great things in America is we think, we have this very odd idea of America as being a country of McDonald's and KFC and Hollywood and all that. But actually, the real genius of America is that at the ground level, at the neighborhood level, they join us. Americans are called joiners. They get together and they discuss about the problems of schools, problems of street level, problem of crime in the neighborhood. That's really what we should think about, is our neighborhood.
Community bonding. Yes, completely, sir. So it's been a very insightful session, and I personally loved it, sir, to talk about it. And thank you so much, sir, for joining in and talking about the quality education in India and its future. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.